Need to finish the job or start one the right way? Get the right stuff at East West Rental Center. You can switch to easy mode using industrial strength equipment. With years of experience helping builders, East West Rental gives you exactly what you need. Tools for landscaping, concrete, lifts, trucks, tables, tents, chairs, water blasters, excavators, forklifts, air compressors, and more. Call East West Rental Center at 646-1463 or visit them in Upper Tumont. Open Monday to Saturday from 7 to 5, Sundays 8 to 5.
Travel woes continued on Monday as American Airlines canceled hundreds more flights after scrubbing about 2,000 of them over the weekend.
American blames wind and staff shortages. Weather now more difficult to react to, says the airline, with crew numbers slow in coming back since the pandemic. American hubs in Dallas, Fort Worth, and Charlotte taking the heaviest hits, with cancellations cascading across the country. Some questioning whether a federal vaccine mandate for airline employees is contributing to the short staffing. The airlines say no. United, for example, says of its 67,000 employees, only a tiny fraction have resisted the vaccine. At Philadelphia International Airport, I'm Jeff Flock, Fox News.
About 9,000 of New York's city workers were put on unpaid leave Monday for refusing to comply with the coronavirus vaccine mandate. Mayor de Blasio said thousands of city firefighters called out sick in an apparent protest, but the mayor insists there have been no disruptions to city services as a result of staffing shortages. Deadlines are approaching for military personnel to get the vaccine or face discipline.
The vast majority of active duty U.S. military forces has already gotten at least one required COVID vaccine shot, but tens of thousands still haven't. There are some exemptions for medical or religious reasons, and those are being decided by unit commanders around the world on what the Pentagon says will be a case-by-case basis. For those who don't get exemptions and still refuse a shot, military leadership may consider transferring them, travel restrictions, limits on deployments, and even requirements to repay bonuses. In Washington, Jill Nato, Fox News.
A judge in California says the counties that sued 4 pharmaceutical companies for billions of dollars failed to prove the companies made the opioid crisis worse. I'm Jack Callahan. This is Fox News.
When's the last time you looked at your homeowner's insurance?
A homeowner's policy protects much more than just your house. It also protects you against claims from someone being hurt on your property. If a visitor is injured at your place, how much are you covered for? The smart thing to do is get the answer today.
That's the Insurance Extra Point. Get out there and make something good happen today by calling Guahan Insurance Services at 475-1162 or visit us at the Camacho Landmark Center in Tamuning.
Leah Dunca from Security Title here with a little information about trusts. A trust is a legal entity capable of owning property. It can protect property from issues such as lawsuits or divorce and can be used to distribute property and avoid probate. Many trusts start as revocable but become irrevocable when the initial trustees die. Work with your estate planning attorney to see if a trust is a good fit for your family property. Call the professionals at Security Title. We are here to help.
Guam Auto Spot has the best selection in Buick, GMC, Mitsubishi, and used cars like the 2021 Mitsubishi Mirage starting at $127 per paycheck, 0 down. Call 671-478-AUTO to take a test drive or get pre-approved online at GuamAutospot.com.
Welcome to Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie, the only show on talk radio where common sense is a lot more common. Phone lines are now open at 888-TALK. That's 888-8255. And now, The Point proudly brings you Tall Tales with Senator Bob Klitzkie.
A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. That's what I always say every day, and I'm going to keep saying it every day, so long as I have the ability to talk. It's going to last for a long time. So here we are on Tall Tales once again. The Second Amendment is still intact. I go now to Zemi Ikotny. And I got the Daily News editorial in front of me. I suppose it's comforting to see that although the Daily News is no longer a Gannett newspaper, it's still firmly anchored on the left side of the political spectrum. Yeah. Our view, Build Back Better bill could open doors for Guam residents. Joe Biden and the Build Back Better bill.
Brought to you by Dr. Seuss.
Yeah, and when it comes to Joe Biden, of course, it's time for a cheer. Are you ready for the cheer, Jose?
Let's hear it.
Let's go, Brandon. I didn't hear it coming from you, Jose.
Let's go, Brandon.
Yeah, so maybe during the big halftime show, people up in the stands will be cheering, let's go, Brandon. Yeah.
I think I hear them already.
Yeah. Last week, the Biden administration unveiled its framework for the $175 billion Build Back Better bill. Now, this administration doesn't believe in legislation, things like bills and resolutions. Framework is what's important. It's a framework. And some of their members of their own party are saying, framework, schmamework. We're not voting for anything unless we see a bill. Reminding us all, of course, of Nancy Pelosi and her memorable words concerning the Obamacare or Affordable Care Act bill when she pronounced in the open session of the House of Representatives, we have to vote for it. Otherwise, we won't know what's in it. Yeah, kind of the same theory as our legislature used on Bill 130. We got to vote for it. We won't find out what's in it until somebody else reads it tomorrow, and then we'll know what's in it. After months of discussion by members of Congress, quote, we are pretty certain that the items that are in the package at this time are likely to be retained in the package. This comes from our own Michael San Nicolas. San Nicolas said the bill included infrastructure funding for a new hospital, about $345 million specifically for Guam. Now, that's a good start, depending on how many times we have to pay for the land that the hospital is built on. Yeah, if we only have to pay for the land that the hospital is built on one more time, it might be okay. But there could be another dimension to that. In addition, Guam could be extended full access to supplemental security income benefits and permanently improved Medicare rates and a higher cap. You mean we don't have to ask the Supreme Court to overrule the insular cases after all? I'm shocked. Shocked, I tell you. Shocked. Those benefits alone would make residents excited about the bill. For years, the fight for SSI benefits for the territory has worked its way through the courts. Next week, the Supreme Court will hear arguments in a case involving Puerto Rico. But other benefits would also open up doors, sometimes literally, for residents of Guam. A combined $55.8 million will be available for low-income housing projects. We're going to be able to dramatically increase our housing inventory with those funds, Nicholas said. Those funds can be used to, of course, build inventory. They can be used to provide down payment assistance for low-income families. They can also be used to provide rental assistance for those outside the Section 8 program. Guam would also have access to a $3.5 billion pool to fund housing for senior citizens and people with disabilities. On an island with more than 2,800 families on a waiting list for public housing, that kind of help would make a huge difference for a lot of people. More doors would be opened by college access grants for students in outlying areas. Local students who attend colleges stateside for undergraduate degrees would have their tuition subsidized for all costs beyond the in-state tuition. Such a deal. The island would be eligible for an estimated $150 million for school infrastructure. The money could be used to pay for school development or overall capital improvement needs throughout the school system. San Nicolas said the bill provides about $70 million in community development block grants, of which Guam can expect to receive about $31 million. The money can be used for a variety of purposes that affect low and moderate income residents. Families would also be helped by the bill. We're going to see an increase in support for child care for families, San Nicolas said. For households that make less than $300,000 a year, child care would be subsidized if it exceeds 7% of income. We keep moving in that direction. No sense talking to parents about raising their children when the state could do it for them. According to an announcement from the White House, the plan would be also deliver 2 years of free preschool for every 3- and 4-year-old in America, give more than 35 million families a major tax cut by extending the expanded child tax credit, and expand access to high-quality home care for older Americans and people with disabilities. The White House announcement also promised that nobody earning less than $400,000 per year will pay a penny more in taxes. If you like your tax rate, you can keep your tax rate. Yeah.
Nope.
So who's going to pay for all of this stuff? Billions and billions of dollars. Who's going to pay for it? Well, we know who's going to pay for it. It's not going to be the people that are taking advantage of the benefits. It's going to be several generations downstream that are going to be picking up the tab for this, if in no other way than by having to deal with a greatly inflated currency. The editorial winds up by saying, we will be watching in coming days as the national lawmakers debate the bill. We're glad to see the territories are included in the benefits and hope the language that places us in the bill remains in the bill. All right. So be it. We turn now to the Post. And the Post, I guess, wasn't around when I read yesterday's Daily News editorial. Here's the Post editorial: honoring our loved ones on All Souls Day despite the pandemic. And here's the copy that I have right here. This is really interesting. I'll read the headlines. I printed this off the web at about 1300 today, okay? Honoring our loved ones on All Souls Day despite the pandemic, dash 16 inches with file photo, brackets, editorials, postguam.com.
You're the new copy editor, Bob.
I guess so, yeah. Somebody forgot to clean up the file before it was posted online. Thousands of families take time out today to say a prayer in honor, respect, and remembrance of loved ones who've passed on. This year, All Souls Day masses and gatherings that many grew up with will look very different. In previous years, many of us would have prepped gravesides this past week, then purchased flowers, colorful wreaths, etc. Bring with us to Mass at local cemeteries. While there are fewer restrictions compared to last year, the pandemic is still changing the way we approach our traditions. Last year, cemeteries were closed on All Souls Day, and many families held small gatherings at home. This year, cemeteries will be open, but Mass will be celebrated at most Catholic churches in Guam. The Archdiocese of Agana said Masses will not be celebrated at the cemetery this year as a safety precaution to keep people from crowding and being too close in proximity to each other while we're still... You know, I wonder how much longer we're going to have to go on with this game, you know.
So how was it in the free world over there, Bob?
Well, except for a couple of exceptions, California being one of them. if I had $1 for every mask, every person that I saw wearing a mask, I could give you 50 cents in change. Nobody's wearing masks over there. Nobody's doing the 6 feet of distance. I saw a couple of motels that had signs that said, as company policy, we don't expect you to wear a mask in here. You can if you want to, but you don't have to. I saw a couple that said, if you're vaccinated, you don't have to wear a mask. I guess my only personal instance in dealing with the phenomenon was that Lou and I went to a post office in West Hollywood to mail a couple packages. And of course, there's a long line. And of course, it is the post office. So you got to stretch the line out forever. And I'm just kind of standing there watching what's going on. And this gentleman beside me looks at me in a very earnest manner, said, "You have to move 6 feet away from me. You're not wearing a mask." I felt so bad.
Did you tell him you were 6'1"?
Yeah, I should have told him I'm 6 feet above you, buddy. So I was pleasant. I put on my mask. I played the game. So the post office is pretty stringent on that sort of thing. Most hotels, no. Even the hotel we stayed in, it's right on the borderline between Beverly Hills and West Hollywood. They didn't care if you wore a mask. The employees wore masks, and that was about it.
In contrast to what you're reading here, my sister sent me a video from Lambeau Field because she went to the Packers Washington game, formerly known as the Redskins.
Yeah,
and it
the
was
Washington football team.
You think? With football? But anyways, I digress. It was amazing to see a packed stadium full of people, and you didn't hear the next weekend of a huge, massive outbreak of COVID or Wuhan.
Yeah. And if you look at some of the stuff that appears on the net, there are some places where there's a higher infection rate for people who have been vaccinated, the greater spread rate than those that haven't. And the reason is that those who have been vaccinated and then actually are carrying the virus don't carry as much of it, but they're asymptomatic, so they don't know they're carrying it. So they're sneezing all over everybody. So they're more dangerous than the unvaccinated folks who have these warning signs like runny noses and fevers and things like that. So, but you know, once you get something, once the health establishment gets something in its head, there's no turning back. We have to put roadblocks out on the highway. We have to wear masks. The governor just kicked the ball down the road another month for another emergency executive order, et cetera. And I have the suspicion that it's never going to end. That 10 years from now, people are going to be stumbling around wearing these silly masks, which most of the people who have written about it say they're no good. The virus is small enough that it sneaks through that mask. So I carried a mask around in my pocket, and in those rare occasions when I had to put it on, I did. I suppose that mask is probably one of the most highly virus-containing areas that you could find anywhere, because of all the stuff I've been breathing into it all that time. So yeah, I think this is just going to go on forever. And of course, there are some people that are just having too much fun to let it go, too much power. Yeah, so anyhow, the folks at the cemetery during All Souls Day are not going to have to wear masks. These would be the people that are easily 6 feet away because they're 6 feet underground. There's no requirement that they wear masks. Although I suspect that Dr. Fauci is working on some kind of a plan to require that. Yeah, so much for Demi Ekotny. Okay, we switch from there into the card. This is what I've got on the card today. I've got People of Guam versus Guam. I've got Bavacqua versus Tweed. I've got Henry Rogers versus AT&T, which I started yesterday but didn't have a chance to finish. And if necessary, I would go back into the governor versus pre-condemnation owners. I thought that there would be more reaction to that item yesterday than was, because this whole give the land back to the original owners is an issue that causes emotional intensity to increase dramatically in a very short period of time. Okay, so let's start out with people of Guam versus Guam. And I've got a story here from PNC News. Several factors may have caused decrease in Guam's population. And the article talks in terms of the fact that Guam's population decreased by 3.5% between 2010 and 2020. Now, I saw something online that was official, some kind of figure put out by the Census Bureau for 2019, and in 2019 they estimated that Guam had about 170,000 people. So the drop may be even more dramatic than this story lays out. But we're over 5,000 fewer people now than we were in 2010. Now, from a matter of civic boosterism, we'd see that as bad news. Wow. Because every time anybody asks me about Guam, oh, how big is it? Because news reports talk about Guam as being a tiny island. Guam's not a tiny island. It's a small island. Wake, Midway are tiny islands, not Guam. How many people live there? About 160, 170,000. I suppose they're all in the military, right? No, only a small fraction are in the military. Well, there are bases there, aren't there? Yeah, but the civilian economy up until this pandemic came along was primarily a tourism economy. We have a $4.5 billion gross island product, primarily driven by tourism. So I like to point out the good things about Guam, shatter some of the myths and things like that. So when somebody says, how many people live there? I'll have to say, well, I can't remember what the latest census was, but in 2010, it was 160,000. So from that standpoint, and giving you an example closer to home, the little town that I grew up in, the year I was born, had about 2,900 people. Of course, that's been over 80 years ago, right? It's got over 10,000 people now. Yeah. Elkhorn, Wisconsin. And we used to say that Elkhorn was so small that both city limit signs were on the same post. And if anybody wanted to know the exact location was near a big Shell station. So by the time I got out of high school, the population was almost 3,600. Still really, really small. Smaller than Delavan, smaller than Lake Geneva, smaller than Whitewater, smaller than Burlington, all of our historic rivals. Elkhorn was the smallest one. Well, when 2010 came along, Elkhorn poked through 10,000, from about 7,500 to over 10,000. You think people weren't proud of that?
Was it a long winter?
Yeah. And bigger than Delavan, bigger than Lake Geneva, almost as big as Burlington. So this was a matter of great civic pride. The key was that Interstate 43 had been completed in the late 50s, or excuse me, late 70s, and living in Elkhorn and commuting to Milwaukee had really caught on. So it's less than an hour drive.
So you guys became the suburbs.
Well, at least the exurbs. Yeah.
Ex-suburbs.
Yeah. So, just looking at it, ordinarily I think we start out with a proposition that more people, a bigger number, a higher population, hey, that's good. Yeah, we're doing great. But let's engage in a little critical thinking here. Let's stand back and think about that. Is it good? If over 5,000 people left the island, is that necessarily bad? I can think of about 5,000 people that if I were to make a list, they'd be on it. They'd be the first ones out of here. I suspect I'm on some of those lists myself. But Guam is a small island. Resources are finite. We've only got 212 square miles. Do the math. That's not very many hectares per person. We are in basically a food desert. We don't produce even probably 1% of what we eat here. It all has to come in by sea. And some of our locations are pretty darn crowded. And crowded cities tend to have higher crime rates than the wide open spaces. Perhaps many of the 5,000 left because they couldn't find work. Well, if they can't find work here, then perhaps it's better that they shove off for greener pastures, browner pastures. I guess it depends on the individual, right?
Whiter winters.
Whiter winters, yeah. So if you look at life as a zero-sum game, if there's only so much to go around and there are few takers, then a smaller population is a good thing. Having mulled it over a little bit, I tend to think it's a good thing that we have a smaller population, primarily because we don't generate jobs here. And everybody talks, well, the government needs to grow the economy. The only thing the government can grow is the government itself. Jobs come from the private sector, and our only advantage here is basically the three things that real estate folks talk about: location, location, and location. We're close enough to Tokyo and Manila and the rest of East Asia that there are certain advantages in this location, certainly for the military, to have the ability to build on an island that's American this close to Asia. But of course, the closer we are to Asia, the farther we are from the mainland, which for many people is a disadvantage. But the way to see people come back here would be to develop some kind of a vibrant economy. And if we're waiting for Gita or somebody in the government to do this, we're going to have an awful long wait. I remember when Google first started, Jeff Bezos, right? And he started out selling books out of his garage. And by the way, if I had had any foresight, I would have taken long-term leases on every garage in San Jose, California, because almost anything worth having nowadays was invented in a garage in San Jose.
Just the garages.
Yeah, just the garage. The house, I don't care. I just want the garage. Yeah.
That's how a lot of bands came also, the Magic Garage.
Garage bands. So, yeah, and Bezos started that, and then he expanded, and he was still selling books. And I remember reading for several years that he was expanding. He was bringing in a lot of revenue. He was investing a lot of money to expand, but he hadn't shown a profit. And, of course, all the gurus are saying, you can't stay in business if you don't show a profit. Well, obviously, he knew something that nobody else knew, because when he started being profitable, he wrote the book on profitability. So guys like Jeff Bezos have this special talent that they're able to, Jeff Bezos probably isn't really good at anything, pretty good at a lot of things, but he has this ability to pull things all together and make them work and make money at it. My favorite example is Henry Ford. Henry Ford had a pretty good job working for the power company in Dearborn, Michigan. Good, steady job, pretty good pay, etc. So he knew about electricity, he knew about engineering, but he wasn't an ace. He wasn't the top in his field. And he knew a little bit about financing, and he knew a little bit about automobiles. And he knew a lot about people. So we pulled all of these things together, not being really good at anything. and built his first Model T in 1907, built his last, or maybe it was 1910, built his last one in 1927, number 15 million Model Ts. And the price of the Model Ts, instead of increasing, went down. And of course, as the price went down, the sales went up. And because Henry Ford invented the Model T, people in government said, you know, we ought to start thinking about building roads for these Model Ts. It completely changed the world. Not because he was a really great mechanic or builder or inventor or financier or anything like this, but because he could look at these things, see how they could fit together, pull them all together, and make piles of money out of it. That's the way jobs are created. I could give other examples, but I think you see the point. Well, we don't have anybody like that here. Building businesses on Guam that rely strictly on Guam trade don't bring any new revenue into the island.
Well, it looks like when you want to bring revenue to the island, the legislature is quick to want to tax you. Look at the new bill that they're trying to provide to make up for the debacle of 130.
Yeah.
150 million is going to come from businesses.
Yeah, and of course, if you want more of something, subsidize it. If you want less of something, tax it. So if you don't want new businesses, just tax the hell out of them. Keep that 5% gross receipts tax there forever. Yeah. So much for Zemi Kotny today. Let's take a short break, and we'll come back to people of Guam versus Guam, and then I'll move on from there.
The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts of Guam Training.
Hi, I'm Jerry Roberts, and every day on The Ray Gibson Show, I get to comment on the incredibly diverse, fun, challenging, sometimes frustrating, often exciting, but always interesting world of work. I hope you'll be there with us.
You can find daily transcripts of The Extra Point at guamtraining.com. Tune in every weekday morning at 7:20 for The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts, brought to you by Guahan Insurance Services and First Hawaiian Bank on 93.3 The Point.
Hafude, konnichiwa,
Patois. Ciao. Enter for a chance to win the 76 Circle K World Cuisine Giveaway. Be one of 3 lucky winners to win a passport of free food from around the world at over 15 different local restaurants. Just stop by any 76 Circle K, purchase $35 or more in fuel to get an entry form. Drive by today and taste the world with 76 Circle K's World Cuisine Giveaway. Visit 76circlekguam.com for more details. Some conditions apply. Circle K, take it easy.
We now return to Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie, soaring over the confusion with his superpowers of truth. Call 888-TALK. That's 888-8255.
So here we are, wrapping up here, people of Guam versus Guam. People of Guam, meaning those who left, versus Guam, meaning those of us who stayed behind. It would be interesting if our Bureau of Statistics and Plans, which I always refer to as BOSAP, if BOSAP could perhaps conduct some kind of a survey to survey, if we could find out who left and find out exactly why they left, we might be able to gain some insight into what's going on by doing that. I think I covered some of the reasons, but be interesting to find out what somebody else thinks about it. Okay, next I'm going to go to Bavacqua versus Tweed, but before I do, I've got our Carl on the line. You know, almost everywhere that I went in the mainland, Pittsburgh, Wisconsin, Texas, California, people asked, do you work with that guy who's the most dangerous man in the room? Our Carl? Yeah, that guy. You work with him? Well, yeah, sort of. Whoa. So your fame is spread, our Carl.
Fame or infamy, I don't know which it is.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, just like what's happening in the States, sometimes I have to wonder, with what's going on with this administration, how much of this is purposely trying to drive an economy into the ground. There's just been so many things that have happened that I can't even imagine it happening without it being strategic in some way. I like to say it's the left's stated goal is the destruction of capitalist America and the establishment of socialist America. And I think there's at least a faction on Guam that is their desire, on Guam, is to drive this into the ground and replace it with something else. I wanted to call in really to say something brief about one of the pioneers of the hotel industry on Guam, Mr. Al Israel. He, at a time, when Tumon Bay looked nothing like it does now, there was not a single major hotel on it, not one. And he had the vision of standing on that beach and looking down, and seeing the white sand, and he envisioned what it could be. And that is something that entrepreneurs bring, is they bring a vision, they bring the ability to plan and coordinate things, like you were saying, pull together resources to create, resources that are worth X, but when you combine them, they're worth 10X, 100X, a million X, a billion X, and he was one of those people that had that gift to look at a scenario and just imagine, what if we did this?
Here's what he told me, Carl. He had an apartment down on the beach, and he converted the apartment into the first hotel not exactly the first, but the first hotel in that area, called the Fujita Hotel, which was in operation for quite some time. It was the first hotel. And he said that there was no visitors bureau or anything like that. He said what he did was he got a hold of somebody in Japan to make signs that you put on the trunk of taxi cabs. These used to be pretty prevalent, even in the States. A good way to advertise was to put a sign in. And he had these signs made up selling Guam sun and sand, put them on the backs of taxi cabs in Tokyo. And at about the same time, it was decided by Japan Airlines that it was cheaper for them to fly down to Guam and back overnight than it was to leave the plane on the ground at Haneda because of the charge for parking the plane. So that's how we got our one flight a day. We brought the tourists down to Al's hotel, and he was fantastically successful. A classic Henry Ford type of guy, Al was good at a lot of things, but no one would remember him as the expert on any particular thing, except pulling all kinds of things together in accordance with his vision and making huge amounts of money out of it. And good for him.
Yeah, and he wasn't obsessed with, at least to me as an onlooker, okay, he didn't seem to be obsessed with the material accumulation of things. He just seemed to have a love of building, and his son, Michael, would, I'm sure, be able to comment much more on his mindset. But to me, he just seemed to enjoy that process of building, and the side effect of it, the money, seemed to be kind of a minor thing to him. At least from someone who was watching him. He wore ordinary clothes, shorts, and he
even had shorts to wear with a tuxedo.
Exactly. So he just wasn't obsessed with that end of things. He just loved to build and build and build. And I was fortunate enough to, see a little glimpse into what he did, and I'm just thankful there are people like that, that are willing to go through that kind of pressure, because it's just unbelievable pressure, to conceive of something like that and then pull it all together and deal with all the day-to-day problems, and people that, Marx's concept, this idea of the proletariat, and they really provide all the value, and labor is important, there's no doubt about that. But places like India, millions, hundreds of millions of people labor from morning till night, and it takes an entrepreneur to have a vision and to pull all this stuff together and coordinate people and materials and everything to make something happen. Just laboring really doesn't result in a whole lot except more labor, So anyway, I just wanted to chime in about Mr. Israel. I knew him I still can't call him Al after all these years. Still always Mr. Israel. I knew him when I was a little street urchin in Tamuning, running around that area, and I'd see him once in a while, and he'd chat with me a bit. Always very down to earth.
Yeah, but wait a minute, Carl. I knew you when you were a little street urchin running around in Mong, and you don't call me Mr. Klitzkie.
Yeah, well, you gave me permission early on to call you Bob, so I kind of had that. But he never really technically gave me permissions, and I never felt, that freedom to be able to call him Al. Although a lot of people did call him Al, even people that worked in his office. But I just never felt quite that freedom to do that.
Okay, well, we'll let you go this time, Carl.
All right, I just wanted to chime in on one of our pioneers, and we need more people like that.
Absolutely.
To build and conceive things, pull things together, and if we penalize them, the capital is going to flow somewhere else. It will find somewhere else that doesn't penalize it and destroy it and suck it up into government bureaucracy. If we don't do it, someone else will take it, believe me. Anyway, Bob, welcome back, and it's great to have you behind the golden tall tales mic again.
It's good to be back, Carl.
All right.
Good talking to you. See you later. Yeah, our Carl. Okay, next item on the card is Bavacqua versus Tweed. And this is, I think, the fourth in a series of columns of Michael Bavacqua beating up on George Tweed.
Or how I let Tweed rent-free live in my head.
Yeah, so here's the latest one. Dozens of Chamorros helped hide Navy radio man George Tweed during World War II Japanese occupation of Guam. Some hid him for a few days, others for weeks. Antonio Artero hid him for more than half the war total. Helping Tweed came with many risks. Felix Torres, for example, hid Tweed early during the war and was caught. He was put in prison by the Japanese for 2 months and each morning was beaten prior to spending the day doing forced labor. If the Japanese accused of Chamorro of helping Tweed before the end of the war, the Chamorro could be executed, as some were. For the most part, in his book, Robinson Crusoe, USN, Tweed describes the Chamorro people in a positive light. They are generous, self-sacrificing, and loyal to the U.S. Tweed mentioned some Chamorros that he considered to be collaborators who had betrayed the U.S. by working with the Japanese. But many of those characterizations were false or based on secondhand information Tweed received. But as I mentioned in a previous column, Tweed's main complaint was that Chamorros couldn't keep his location a secret. They continually gossiped or boasted about helping the American holdout. This was part of the motivation for the 1946 protest against Tweed. Many, but not all, felt they were misrepresented in the Tweed book, so many had suffered directly or indirectly because of Tweed, and so his portrayal of them as reckless gossips was offensive. One reason why it offended these families so much was because Tweed's penchant for reckless and selfish behavior. While Tweed's book depicts the Navy holdout as a serious and survival-minded individual in a desperate situation, a fair number of individuals who helped Tweed described him as the opposite. Now, once again, I wonder what the source of this information is. I've read Tweed's book, and I know what the source of that information is. I've read Bob Rogers' History of Guam, and so, everything I could get my hands on about the occupation. But the stuff that Bavacqua comes up with, I'm not saying it's not true or inaccurate. I just wonder where he gets it. They describe Tweed as being Campten, K-A-M-T-E-N, Campten, which means restless and unable to keep still. Those who helped Tweed in the first half of the occupation said he wouldn't stay put. Different families would establish hiding places for Tweed and promise to bring him food and other supplies. Too often they would find him gone, that he had wandered off somewhere. Well, this guy, yeah. Sometimes it was simple boredom, being alone in the jungle most days and nights. But some families said Tweed was Campten in another sense, meaning to be horny. Whoa. During the war, there were some women who were rumored to be connected romantically to Tweed, and in the first year of the occupation, he would sneak away from his hiding places to visit them. Pedro Cruz, who helped Tweed, reported how nerve-wracking it was, not only because of the risks involved, but because people kept telling him they were running into and meeting Tweed when he was supposed to be hiding. He said, quote, "Boy, that guy made me suffer. I couldn't sleep at night. Many people kept telling me, 'Hey, I met Tweed. He has long hair.'" Over the decades, articles have been published in local newspapers that give voice to Chamorros who felt misrepresented or libeled by Tweed's book. Tweed acknowledged the many mistakes or potential problems with the book, but refused to print an updated version to help correct the record. Next week, we'll learn more about why. So, if all you knew about Bavacqua and Tweed is that Bavacqua has a penchant for tearing down Tweed, I suspect that somewhere along the line, the story will come out that Tweed owned slaves. Because we're watching the same thing happen here with American history. People that we thought had some admirable characteristics and were heroes are, the left is going to great lengths to trash them. George Washington, the founder of our, yeah, but he had slaves. Yeah, Thomas, yeah, but he was a slaveholder. So when we find these things out, we have to cancel these people. And I don't know if Daryl mentioned this during the time that he was the alternate host of the show, but I sent a note to Daryl that I was going to start a GoFundMe account to build a statue of George Tweed, preferably right down in Skinner Plaza near the museum. We should build a statue of George Tweed. Then we would have something to tear down. Which is exactly what Bavacqua was doing here.
He did relay that message.
Yeah, and that's exactly what's going on here. If you read Tweed's book, he certainly was no angel. He was a sailor. What do you expect? But he had an interesting story. And his story had, I suppose, some important points that, that if you want to bad enough, you can survive in almost anything. 1.1. Point 2, it's human nature for people to help other people. Point 3, obviously there was some affection for Americans amongst the local population at the time. Point 4, there was very little or none for the Japanese at the time. So there's perhaps a few things to be gained from going back and studying Tweed, but let's say that Bavacqua was successful, and who is it? Julian Uggen is supposedly writing the textbook.
I think it's already completed.
Yeah, so it would be absolutely essential to have a chapter in that textbook. Tweed was an idiot. Tweed was a bad, bad person, to set the record straight, right?
You know, strategically, they should have wrote the chapter on Tweed so they could rip it out later on.
Exactly, exactly. So what is to be gained now? Let's see, 44, 77 years later, to go back now and to smear Tweed as much as we possibly can. I could see it, you know, not long after the war was over. I could understand it. But to go back now and smear Tweed, what's the point of this exercise? Are we going to try to extract some bounty from Tweed's survivors? If you give me this, that, or the other thing, I'll stop saying bad thing about your great-great-grandpa or something like that? Well, to me, it all fits very nicely into the critical race theory set of tactics. And I've been through this before, but it bears repeating. Critical race theory starts out with the idea that everything that you do is governed by race. Race is the essential element of everything. And, of course, we had George Tweed, who was a Navy man. He was white. He was the Navy. He was the United States government on Guam during the Japanese occupation. He was the last remnant of the American government. So if you are practicing critical race theory, you have to go back and destroy all of the heroes of the previous regime. George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Abraham Lincoln was a racist. Pay no attention to that Emancipation Proclamation that he came up with. He was a racist. So let's take a short break here and we'll come back to Bavaco versus Tweed.
Come try Guam's original Chamorro restaurant with Pica's best 5 years running. Mezcla Chamorro Fusion Bistro. Experience Chef Peter's candied salmon over scallion coconut rice, octopus tenactac, Chamorro platter, and their award-winning gourmet hamburgers. Or if you're looking for something healthy, try their keto-friendly menu. Come and enjoy Mezcla's half-a-day service at their Hagåtña and Grand Plaza Tumon location. Call their Hagåtña location at 479-2652 for reservations.
Always here to help you. This island is our home. Through the years, we've been a friend to the neighbors we have known. Now we're banking on the future. More services to choose. Bank Pacific, where others put branches, we place roots.
So, critical race theory, one of the tactics of those who practice critical race theory is that you have to denigrate people that had a good reputation in the past. Like in the United States, it's the founding fathers, racists, slaveholders, really bad people. And just another example that everything that happens is race. And that the reason that it's race is because of white supremacy, where those folks of the white persuasion set up this systemic racism to make sure that they can take advantage of what are referred to nowadays as people of color. So it's very important in the critical race theory to emphasize these points, to make sure that everyone understands that if you are not white, white folks are not up to any good for you, and that it's always been that way. So you go back and you take a guy like Tweed, and now after all these years, you beat up on him, you denigrate him, you find everything that you can to say bad about him, not because anybody cares, but it's a way of laying that foundation. So once you've got people indoctrinated into this thing that Tweed was really a bad person that didn't like Chamorros, then the next step is, and remember, Tweed was U.S. Navy. Tweed was white. So Tweed is just a product of the systemic racism. And the fact that Tweed is gone now doesn't make things any different. The systemic racism continues. And the way to break out of the systemic racism, in Bavacqua's case, is to break away from the United States, to have an independent Guam. Then we won't have to put up with racism, white people, George Tweed, George Washington, all of these other things. We'll be on our own.
If I can just interject misplaced wokeness, we have this narrative of Tweed that really, for what it's worth, and everything could be true, is it really worth or going to be moving anything to expose all this or to keep harping on it right now, as opposed to somebody like Margaret Sanger, who is celebrated in the left until probably most recently, but was the mother, quote-unquote mother, of abortion in the United States, of a eugenics movement, which to me needed to be exposed because that's a perpetuating evil, where Tweed's narrative doesn't perpetuate anything bad.
Yeah, exactly. Whatever Tweed did that he shouldn't have done didn't carry on beyond Tweed. It would have been different if he had gone around and sabotaged Chamorros or turned them over to the Japanese or something like that. But whatever bad thing he did, once Tweed was off the island, that was the end of it. He didn't start any great trends or anything like that.
And where we have Margaret Sanger's legacy of millions of babies aborted.
Yeah. Well, of course, Bavacqua has come out and said, well, it was really part of the abortion was really part of the Chamorro culture because my mother was pro-abortion and she was a nurse. Let's break for the big halftime show.
The Point is KUSG, Hagåtña, Guam, 93.3 FM and 104.3 HD3.
It's Election Day. I'm Jack Callahan, Fox News. 2 congressional seats are up for grabs in Ohio. 7 large cities are holding mayoral elections. And the voters in New Jersey and Virginia will decide governor's races today, the latter the most closely watched.
For his closing argument, Terry McAuliffe repeatedly referenced a man who is not up for election.
Donald Trump wants to win here tomorrow night so he can next day announce for president of the United States of America, well, we're going to put an end to Donald Trump's future plans right here in Virginia.
McAuliffe's opponent, Glenn Youngkin, crisscrossed the Commonwealth with a number of stops to make his final plea to voters to turn out and end Terry McAuliffe's latest run for the State House.
He wants to raise your taxes without you having a voice. He believes in big government, but on the other side of the ballot is liberty and freedom.
This race could be an early bellwether for the national political scene, perhaps a harbinger of things to come in the midterms next year.
Fox's Kevin Corke reports that Terry McAuliffe enjoyed the lead among early voters, but polls suggest late deciders are breaking for Glenn Youngkin. Wrapping up a 2-day appearance at the UN Climate Summit in Scotland, President Biden says his administration is launching a wide-ranging plan to reduce methane emissions, targeting the oil and gas sector in the U.S. and cracking down on pipeline leaks. The fate of the president's social spending plan still uncertain, as West Virginia Democrat Senator Joe Manchin says he's still not supporting the $1.75 trillion plan and says withholding the votes on the infrastructure bill will not change his mind.
For the sake of the country, I urge the House to vote and pass the bipartisan infrastructure bill. Holding this bill hostage is not going to work in getting my support for reconciliation bill.
Democrats need a yes from all 50 senators who caucus with the Democrats in order for the vice president to be able to cast a tie-breaking vote in the Senate. America is listening to Fox News.
Leah Dunca from Security Title here with a little information about trusts. A trust is a legal entity capable of owning property. It can protect property from issues such as lawsuits or divorce and can be used to distribute property and avoid probate. Many trusts start as revocable but become irrevocable when the initial trustees die. Work with your estate planning attorney to see if a trust is a good fit for your family property. Call the professionals at Security Title. We are here to help.
Contact Express Financial for all your financial needs. Express Financial is consumer lending at its very best. They also have a host of dealer service programs with quick approvals. There are 3 ways to apply. Over the phone at 637-9834. You may visit their office in person at 600 Harmon Loop Road across the street from Costuless. Or you can also visit their webpage and apply at myexpressfinancial.com. In most cases, you'll get your money the same day.
Another decision coming today on coronavirus vaccines for children as young as 5.
The U.S. Food and Drug Administration has already green-lighted an emergency authorization for Pfizer's COVID-19 vaccination for kids. Now, the top review board for the Centers for Disease Control has their chance. The CDC's Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices will meet today and could vote in favor of authorizing it. The pediatric version of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine is a third of the dose adults get, though it is also a 2-round vaccine. Once again, the experts will need to discuss the noted side effects like myocarditis or heart inflammation. Eben Brown, Fox News.
Top drug manufacturers have won around in a California lawsuit that blamed them for the opioid crisis and sought billions of dollars to cover the cost of dealing with it. A judge ruling Monday that local governments had not proven that Johnson & Johnson used deceptive marketing to inflate prescriptions. Lawyers for L.A., Orange, and Santa Clara counties say they will appeal. The lawyer for the assistant director on the film Rust says he is not responsible for the on-set accident the week before last that left the film's cinematographer shot to death.
The investigation into the death of Helena Hutchins on the set of the film Rust continues, and according to the New York Times, Assistant Director David Hall said in an affidavit that he wasn't sure if he properly checked the gun when he passed it to actor Alec Baldwin. Hall's attorney, Lisa Tarraco, says that's not all the facts.
I have received information from crew members that the armor handed it directly to Baldwin.
Tarraco said Baldwin puts it in the holster, and at some point he wanted to adjust his holster. He then hands it to Halls, who then hands it back to Baldwin. There were several people that checked the gun, but Tarraco said that's not an assistant director's job. Michelle Polino, Fox News.
And I'm Jack Callahan. This is Fox News.
When's the last time you looked at your homeowner's insurance?
An easily overlooked part of covering our home is what's inside of it. Over time, we buy things we don't want to lose, but don't update our contents coverage. The smart thing to do is get the answers and level up our insurance to make sure we're totally protected.
That's the Insurance Extra Point. Get out there and make something good happen today by calling Guahan Insurance Services at 475-1162 or visit us at the Camacho Landmark Center in Tamuning.
Need to finish the job or start one the right way? Get the right stuff at East West Rental Center. You can switch to easy mode using industrial strength equipment. With years of experience helping builders, East West Rental gives you exactly what you need. Tools for landscaping, concrete, lifts, trucks, tables, tents, chairs, water blasters, excavators, forklifts, air compressors, and more. Call East West Rental Center at 646-1463 or visit them in Upper Tumont. Open Monday to Saturday from 7 to 5, Sundays 8 to 5.
Fuel up today with the new $8 gasolina meal. 2 all-beef Nathan's hot dogs, a big bag of chips, regular size M&Ms, and a 16-ounce gasolina energy drink. The brand new drink in a black can that brings a burst of energy. Drive in now and fire up your day with the $8 gasolina meal. Promo is only available at your favorite Circle K Guam locations while supplies last. Circle K, take it easy.
Guam Auto Spot has the best selection in Buick, GMC, Mitsubishi, and used cars like the 2021 Mitsubishi Mirage starting at $127 per paycheck. 0 down. Call 671-478-AUTO to take a test drive or get pre-approved online at GuamAutospot.com.
So here we are, second half of Tall Tales, after another great halftime show that we've all come to know and love so much. And I'm going to spend a little bit more time here with Bavacqua versus Tweed. Yes, he's written several columns telling us about George Tweed, convincing us that George Tweed was a bad person, and attempting to cancel George Tweed. Now, for instance, he said that George Tweed's book reported that there was a tendency amongst Chamorros to gossip about Tweed. And the way Bavacqua presents this, it doesn't matter if Tweed was correct in what he said. The fact that he said it is enough. In other words, you just don't say bad things like that about Chamorros. Whether it's true or not, immaterial. So Bavacqua really goes to great lengths here to draw this critical race theory picture of George Tweed as the American who took advantage of Chamorros. And, of course, he was the United States government. He was a white man. Just another example of white supremacy, systemic racism, which I suspect is going to become a more and more prominent part of the separatist rhetoric as time goes on. My own analysis is that when it comes right down to it, there are very few separatists here on the island. There are some people on the island who would, if you'll pardon the expression, bitch about the United States government. But that's a very natural thing in a democratic form of government. You know, there are always people who are going to be complaining about City Hall and those idiot aldermen and the dumbass mayor, et cetera, right? So the fact that people are dissatisfied from time to time with the United States government doesn't necessarily mean that they're separatists and that they want Guam to become independent. We have yet to see the rally called by Michael Bavacqua and Melvin Wanpat, where the separatists are encouraged to come to the rally, bring their passports, and burn them like people used to burn their draft card as a show of dissatisfaction with their colonial status. My own analysis is that if the separatist movement were not supported by the government of Guam, which it is. You know, we've got people on the payroll who advocate separatism. If it were not supported by the government of Guam, and if it were strictly a volunteer effort, you probably wouldn't even see much in the papers. If Bavacqua announced that on 10 o'clock Saturday morning, we're going to have a rally for all separatists at Ipoh Beach, how many people do you think would show up? Not very many, yeah. So it's a case of good-paying government jobs to get out a message that is perhaps of limited appeal to most of the people that live on the island. But like anything else, if you say it long enough and loud enough, you're going to have some impact. Certainly the Daily News seems to carry water for the separatists as often as it can. The Post, from time to time, I'll never forget the July 5th editorial in the Post. That was the most blatant example of the newspaper bending over backwards to help the separatists. So we'll wait for Bavacqua's next editorial or next column next week. In the meantime, the November edition of Pacific Island Times, at least the web edition, the email edition, the electronic edition is out. And it should be in the stores today or tomorrow or soon. And if you had an overpowering desire to pick up that magazine, you could find some of my musings on what I refer to sometimes as the Chamorro Separatist Commission. There's an article in there about that, and I may chat about it a little bit on the program next week or so. Okay, last week, as you were yesterday, I started talking about Henry Rogers versus AT&T. And Henry Rogers also goes by the name of Ibram X. Kendi, and he is the champion of anti-racism. Now, in this era of redefining words, you got to remember that when you think you know a word, you really have to spend some time to make sure you do. Because I used to know exactly what a racist was. A racist was a person who reacted to people based on their physical characteristics, their color, etc., in accordance with stereotypes that were made up to tell you exactly what to expect from these people. In other words, to prejudge people, and on the basis of your prejudgment, discriminate against those people. That's what racism used to mean. At least it used to mean that to me. That's not what it means anymore. Nowadays, if you didn't do any of the things that I mentioned, you didn't engage in the stereotypes, you didn't discriminate, etc., that doesn't mean you're home free. You're still a racist. Because the only way to not be a racist, according to Ibram X. Kendi, is to be an anti-racist. In order to be an anti-racist, you must go out of your way to denigrate the white race, especially white males, and to provide equity, inclusion, and what's the third one? Equity, inclusion, and diversity in everything that you do. So, as I explained it yesterday, if people of different races are not represented in a population in accordance with their numbers, there can only be one example, or can only be one explanation: systemic racism. And this guy, Rogers, has made a career and made a lot of money out of his anti-racist theory. Racial inequity is when two or more racial groups are not standing on approximately equal footing, Kendi claims. Kendi cites as an example disparities in home ownership rates between those of different races. That is, to anti-racists, equity is not about the rights or opportunities of individuals, but the outcome of groups. Those outcomes, Kendi claims, are solely attributable to policy. As he writes, if you believe that groups are equals, the only other explanation to persisting inequity and injustice is power and policy. Racist ideas are not only those that suggest one racial group is inferior or superior to another racial group in any way, but those that would challenge the idea that racist policies are necessarily the total cause of all racial inequity, given that anti-racist ideas argued that racist policies are the cause of racial inequities. In short, it appears you would be charged as a racist if you challenge anti-racism. For example, if you suggest that differences in outcome between different groups might be explained by giving other than the anti-racist policies rooted in racist ideas, you are also being racist if you support a racist policy, as Kendi defines it, by your action or inaction. So that's Kendi and anti-racism. So if you take it a step farther, in other words, if there isn't equity, if at the end of the race everybody doesn't get a medal, then there's only one solution. The government has to work. The government has to take away something from one group and give it to the other, so that we have equity. That's the job of the government if you're an anti-racist, like Kendi. And then he goes through a list here: standardized tests. Kendi calls the most effective racist weapon ever devised to objectively degrade black minds and legally exclude their bodies, standardized tests. Per Kendi, the notion of any achievement gap between different peoples on standardized tests constitutes a racist idea, and the tests are to blame. Then he talks about capitalism, and then the broad American desire for a race-neutral country, which Kendi describes as the most threatening racist movement, and one more dangerous than the alt-right's unlikely drive for a white ethno-state. And then assimilation. Assimilation, given that is premised on the view that there is something wrong with another racial group that needs changing or something right with our racial group that doesn't need changing. On the last point, one wonders, does Kendi feel that his efforts to force Americans to assimilate into his desired culture of anti-racism, when apparently he believes is superior to all others, is racist? So on and on and on. So then I have an article here dealing with AT&T. AT&T reportedly offers critical race theory training program. And kind of the signature line from AT&T's program is this, quote, "White people, you are the problem." AT&T, the world's largest telecommunications company, offers an employee training program that teaches premises such as American racism is a uniquely white trait, and white people, you are the problem, according to a new report. AT&T has disputed some of the claims in the report and dismissed it as misleading. A senior AT&T employee who spoke with Christopher Rufo on the condition of anonymity said managers at the company now face annual assessment on diversity issues, and there is mandatory participation in race re-education exercises. The source allegedly told Rufo that white employees are expected to confess their complicity in white privilege and systemic racism, or they will be penalized in performance reviews. So, in short, AT&T has drunk the anti-racist Ibram K. Kendi Kool-Aid straight to the bottom of the pitcher. Now, you know a little bit about Ibram Kendi, also known as Henry Rogers, and you know that he's had, give him this, he's had a tremendous impact on American society, on our schools, on our school board meetings, on our government, on our president, etc. Now, he got caught up in his own rap. And here's an article that ran just a couple days ago. Ibram Kendi inadvertently blows up entire life's work in now deleted tweet, then claims criticism is violent. Boston University professor Ibram K. Kendi, a prominent advocate of anti-racism, deleted a tweet on Friday after his critics pointed out that it may have inadvertently refuted his ideology. On Friday, Kendi shared a news article of a recent survey that discovered more than 1/3 of white students lied or misrepresented their race on college applications. 1/3 of the white students. 4/5 of white students who admitted to lying or misrepresenting their race said they did so to improve their chances of being accepted.
You don't say.
Half of those students who admitted to lying explained they did so to improve their chances of being awarded financial aid earmarked for minority students. More than 1/3 of white students lied about their race on college applications, and about half these applicants lied about being Native American. Where's Pocahontas now that we really need her? More than 3/4 of these students who lied about their race were accepted. Kendi wrote on Twitter. Kendi later deleted his tweet. Kendi's deletion incited an avalanche of mockery. In sharing the news article, Kendi's critics said he was undermining what he believes about white privilege and systemic racism in America. As the Post-Millennial, a newspaper, wrote, if white privilege is so prevalent and pervasive, why would white kids feel the need to disguise their whiteness in order to gain admittance to college and aid to help them attend? Could it be that these white students felt that as oppressed, that as opposed to giving them an edge, their whiteness was a hindrance to admittance? White kids are lying about being black so they can get into college. doesn't make the point Kendi thinks it does, Noam Bloom pointed out. Kendi deleted this tweet after a bunch of people pointed out it undermines his whole worldview that the U.S. is an incredibly racist country where the system is rigged exclusively for white people. Kendi admits it's not actually a privilege to be white. James Lindsay reacted. Race activist Ibram Kendi tweeted out a report claiming high numbers of white students falsely identify as people of color to reap benefits. He deleted the tweet after realizing it didn't advance his argument that whites are privileged in every way, and so on. So how did Kendi respond to this after he had figuratively pulled an Alec Baldwin and shot himself in the foot? Kendi accused one critic of lying about what he said. The critic, Jack Posobiec, then responded that he, quote, broke Kendi. In response, Kendi said Proposiac's broke remark has a long history within racist structures. Kendi then claimed criticism from white people is violent. So, you know, this is critical race theory. And they haven't gotten around to George Tweed yet, but I suspect they will sooner or later. I noticed I had a couple callers, and one of them, I lost one of them. Who did I lose?
That was Kellis, the first caller.
Okay.
He's trying to make a point about proclaiming anti-racist is kind of a racial statement.
Yeah. Okay. Well, maybe Kellis can call back. I'll chat here with Ron McNinch. Let's see. Let's go to Wrigley Field, and then we'll meet Ron McNinch coming out of Wrigley Field. Ron.
The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts of Guam Training.
Hi, I'm Jerry Roberts, and every day on The Ray Gibson Show, I get to comment on the incredibly diverse, fun, challenging, sometimes frustrating, often exciting, but always interesting world of work. I hope you'll be there with us.
You can find daily transcripts of The Extra Point at guamtraining.com. Tune in every weekday morning at 7:20 for The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts, brought to you by Guahan Insurance Services and First Hawaiian Bank on 93.3 The Point.
Come try Guam's original Chamorro restaurant with Pica's Best 5 years running. Mezcla Chamorro Fusion Bistro. Experience Chef Peter's candied salmon over scallion coconut rice, octopus to naktak, Chamorro platter, and their award-winning gourmet hamburgers. Or if you're looking for something healthy, try their keto-friendly menu. Come and enjoy Mezcla's half-a-day service at their Hagåtña and Grand Plaza Tumon location. Call their Hagåtña location at 479-2652 for reservations.
Oh, here we are, Wrigley Field in Chicago for the 7th inning stretch. I hope all of the folks out there in the international radio listening audience had a chance to stand up and stretch. We've only got 2 more innings. It's all tails to go. During the 7th inning stretch, I peeked at Facebook, and Tom Mendiola had an interesting comment. Tom Mendiola says, if Bavacqua succeeds in separating Guam from the U.S., his race will be enslaved by the Chinese, the new colonizer, when the U.S. leaves. An interesting idea. Friends in Saipan tell me that Saipan has become deeply influenced by its Chinese residents, to the point that I might not recognize the Saipan that I used to think I had a lot of knowledge about. Okay, so next we go to Dr. Ron McNinch, who's going to tell us a little bit about Henry Rogers, also known as Abraham Kendi, right?
Hey, Happy Senator, Happy Guam. Welcome back.
It's good to be home.
Very nice. Yeah, just a couple of quick points. And again, I think that I've heard and listened to Kendi at length. I encourage anybody who has an interest in this sort of stuff to really, if they listen to a talk by Kendi, have it like a pen and paper with you, and especially where he tries to define his definition of race and racism, because it creates a total tautology. That is a total circular argument that racism is racism because it's racism. That's the net effect of his definition. And which, to be blunt, I think that requiring people who throw around the term racism to better define exactly what they mean by it, because I have to say there is absolute and genuine racism in the world, in the United States, but I don't see the things that they're talking about in terms of racism as being racism. A lot of it's just human behavior, good, bad, and ugly. In fact, some of the good things that people try to do to be perceived as quote-unquote not racist are actually viewed as racist because they're doing them. So if you're overly polite to persons of color, it's because you're naturally racist and you're trying to overcompensate for it. It's just an absolute set of circular arguments that's very, very unhealthy. And it kills me that many of this guy's ideas are accepted without any sort of challenge whatsoever, because a lot of it's very shallow and very circular. There is one other thing I wanted to mention very briefly, Senator. The young people who were claiming to be of a certain race, in the United States, a person self-reports their race or ethnicity. That's the federal standard. And so I am whatever I say I am. That's not dishonest. That's simply how the system works. And so any person at any time, outside of a person wanting certain kinds of benefits from like Native American tribes that have certain legal ties to certain types of funding, a person's race or ethnicity is simply self-reported and self-believed. And that's why when we talk about things like Title VII and employment discrimination, it's race, color, religion, sex. A person's color is immaterial to their race. And, you know, it's a very, the way a lot of folks talk about these things is very shallow and really detrimental to society, particularly in the United States, given all of the I guess, the hucksterism that happens associated with it. So that's my 2 cents.
Well, this idea of self-reporting who or what you are has gotten to the point that I think I'm going to take advantage of it myself because, you know, I used to think I was a male. I've got male plumbing, etc. And I actually, believe it or not, I actually think I am a male. Yeah, I don't have any female to let out or inner female, etc. And, you know I'm what's called a white man. I'm not Hispanic. I'm not African American, etc. Although I suppose if I felt like it, I could report myself as, Mongolian or something like that. But what I want to do is, I've really gotten tired of clunking around in these size 14 shoes all my adult life. It's really hard to buy shoes any larger than size 12. Size 14, you got to go to some kind of a freak shop to buy those kinds of shoes. There's nothing graceful about a size 14 shoe or a size 14 foot. So I was wondering if I could take this self-reporting thing to my lower extremities and start reporting myself as a size 10D. Would that work, Ron?
Well, it sounds like a very appropriate pronoun for you, sir.
Yeah. So instead of they, him, his, and right, etc. I would be right. I would be 10D, right?
Right.
My pronouns are 10D, and 10. Yeah, I like it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, there's in all of these theories, there's usually something that you can extract that has some benefit to it. I really had a hard time with critical race theory and Henry Rogers and his whole critical race theory thing. And of course, the nice thing about it for Ibram K. Kendi and for I can't remember the lady who wrote about white privilege.
Actually, she's a Caucasian female. I think she's just a mad divorcee, in my opinion.
Yeah.
That one.
What you remember her name? I got it on the tip of my tongue here.
I do not, but
Yeah.
her thinking also is very shallow.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
But they've been able to make tremendous amounts of money with this shallow thinking.
Part of it is, I call it the near-far effect, and that is, I think that people of different races are naturally curious about each other, and so when some expert runs around talking about white privilege, particularly a white person who's talking about white privilege, it's a near-far effect. That is, people who want to know about white people are trying to go to a source, and that's why I think one element of the popularity. I've got to tell you, though, we live in a society where people of different races can readily talk to each other and communicate with each other with very, very little apprehension. And I have a problem with people trying to make the Guam case, because we have such a diverse community and we have such a large amount of intermarriage on Guam, higher than any other person. We did a study about 10 years ago, and my students surveyed grandparents, and 70% of people on Guam have one grandparent that's of another race of the other three. That's how high our diversity level is here. It's very, very high compared to the U.S. mainland. So the things that people try to apply to the Guam case, in my opinion, don't apply here. When these folks start talking about this or that, I'm like, no, Guam case is different in many ways.
Yeah, well, I think I have to agree with you. We don't seem to get all fired up about matters, although there are those who would see a burning ember in the fireplace and fan it and try to develop it into a blazing fire. And I just spent some time talking about one of them here that seems to be bent in that direction as a matter of separating Guam from the rest of the United States.
Yeah, those arguments fall apart in the face of reality, in my opinion, sir. I think that there is the normal center that would not hold those particular views as being valid whatsoever. And there are fringe people who will talk about things around the edges, but they do not represent a majority of views, particularly when you ask people to really define in their own words the concepts being talked about. It's not even close to the interpreted views that some of the people who want to make these separatist kinds of statements doesn't even closely resemble. It's like you can say all you want, and then they're going to interpret it any way they want and say anything they want, which is unfortunate because the reality is reality, and straight talk is straight talk. I mean, that's, people can say their opinions very openly here with very, very little fear of any repercussion, and that's the reality. But anyway, very interesting talk today, and we did miss you while you're off island.
Well, I missed my international radio listening audience also, Ron, so I'm really glad to be back behind the microphone.
Very good. Well, welcome back.
Okay, Ron, nice talking to you again. Okay, so Professor Ron McNinch from the university talking about diversity, Ibram K. Kendi, and citing the fact that Kendi's arguments are tautological. A tautology meaning a circular argument, right?
Some of his not activities, but I guess activities kind of remind me of Rainbow Coalition, Jesse Jackson, kind of extortion schemes, right?
The race hustlers.
The race hustlers.
Yeah.
You know, do this Pepsi or else.
Yeah. You know, I can help. I can come in and counsel you to help you avoid having mobs of angry people throwing rocks through your front window if you'll just give me $10,000 a month.
Exactly.
Yeah. I'd really like to look up the name of the late, I can't even remember the name of the book. Is it something, I think, Fear in the title?
I'm not recalling.
Yeah. So, back again to Kendi, solving fake racism with real racism. The policy of Kendi's solution to allegedly pervasive racism is perhaps more chilling. Since, as Kendi writes, as an anti-racist, when I see racial disparities, I see racism. The anti-racist must devote himself to fixing these disparities. The fix is decidedly not color blindness and freedom, but open discrimination and tyranny. Kendi says, the only remedy to racist discrimination is anti-racist discrimination. The only remedy to past discrimination is present discrimination. The only remedy to present discrimination is future discrimination. He adds, the defining question is whether the discrimination is creating equity or inequity. If discrimination is creating equity, then it is anti-racist. If discrimination is creating inequity, then it's racist. What does this look like in practice? Kendi has advocated for a constitutional amendment to enshrine, quote, the idea that racial inequity is caused by racist policy. Establishing a Department of Anti-Racism comprised of formally trained experts on racism and no political appointees. And that office would pre-clear all local, state, and federal public policies to ensure they won't yield racial inequity, monitor these policies, investigate private racist policies when racial inequity surfaces, and monitor public officials for expressions of racist ideas. The DOA would be empowered with disciplinary tools to wield over and against policymakers and public officials who do not voluntarily change their racist policies and ideas. This sounds really, really good. Talk about utopia. Let's see, I guess I probably got Henry Rogers on the, no, it's Frenchie. It's not Henry Rogers. Well, go ahead for Frenchie. Good afternoon, Frenchie.
Sorry, it's not Henry.
Yeah. I'm glad.
Well, welcome back, Bob. I hope you had a good visit of the mainland.
I certainly did, yeah.
All right. And let's see. I wanted to, well, this Sunday I went to church, and then on the way back I filled my car. And usually it takes me about $75 to fill the car. And this Sunday it was $115. So it's a big change.
Yeah.
And so that was my personal touch with the inflation that most people have been feeling on the mainland, but also on Guam. A little less on Guam because we are used to high price, but I think it's going to start being felt all over the place. And, I was looking at all what has been done in the last 9 to 10 months, and I'm not surprised that we have inflation. If you remember, the 45th president had a policy of America First, which led to energy independence 2 years ago, which is a faraway dream nowadays, since you saw President Biden just was begging OPEC Plus to increase production to let the price go down.
That's the way that's the way the petroleum industry works, right? If you want prices to go down, you beg the producers to lower their prices.
Yeah. It worked very well for Carter in the 70s, if you remember, right? So, but what's interesting is that you have the guys that close the pipelines, that stop oil production in Alaska and other places, who is now worried that we don't have enough oil, and because we don't have enough, the prices are going up. And it's like, you know, the guy was in the Senate for almost 50 years, and he still doesn't understand the economy. And but it's pretty sad because, you know, people are getting hurt because for whatever money they're making, it's being spent either on the devaluation of the dollar, which means they need more money to buy the same thing that they were 6 months ago. And that's tied to the Democrats wanting to spend trillions of dollars and on keeping on printing money like there was no tomorrow, which has led to the situation we're in right now. So, and we're surprised that the OPEC wants a higher price, and it's not surprising because most of oil is traded in U.S. dollar. But if the U.S. dollar is not worth what it used to be worth a year ago, then you need more money for your oil on top of having a shortage of production, because the Chinese and all those people, they need oil as well as we do. So, you know, when people were deriding the 45th president for being too pro-American, we had an independence of energy, and it was part of his plan of bringing the industry back to the United States, which he did partially, but it's now finished. Because in order to have a good industry, you need two things. You need an abundant and cheap energy in order to produce what you're producing, and you also need water. This is why a lot of the large industries are settled along rivers or along lakes, like Detroit, for example. So we have this issue, which has pushed back a lot of the minorities who were doing very well under Trump, now back in the poverty level, which the Democrats are very happy about because they deal on having people needing big government. So they create the situation where people are so poor that they need the government to intervene. And we see it here on Guam. If you want the CRT, which is happening right now, it's basically a new version of the Jim Crow laws, except it's more devious. But then the Biden administration has accelerated the process by allowing millions of illegal immigrants to come over the border unchecked, not only on the medical sense, but unchecked on the lawful sense. And we know that illegal aliens put a big burden on the lower paying jobs, which are usually held by minorities. So what you have is that we're bringing new minorities. We take away the jobs from the minorities that are already here. We're creating social unrest, and we are actually creating the condition that CRT pretends to denounce, but actually is nothing else than racist policies, because basically you're supposed to make a decision not on the character of the people, but on the color of their skin. So we do the quadrature of the circle, if you wish, and we arrive back to where we started back in the 50s. And it's very sad because it's not necessary. But it's obvious that some people do it on purpose. And I think it needs to be denounced, except that Biden denounced white supremacy, which is, you know, a fiber of his own imagination. So That's where we are right now. And then on Guam, we're going to start seeing we might have a stagflation, where the economy doesn't grow at all and the prices keeps going up. So I don't know what you were right 2 years ago to say it might take 4 or 5 years to get out of this crisis that is man-made.
I'm afraid so. I'd rather be wrong on that one, Frenchie, but I'm afraid my prediction was correct.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very, very much for sharing your information with us, Frenchie, and it's good talking to you again after an absence of over a month.
After a good vacation, yeah. And I'm going to be leaving next month for 3 weeks, too.
Okay, back to France?
So, yeah, finally, I finally was able to find. There are less flights than there used to be, but there is a few flights. You just have to use your elbows to get some rooms on the planes. But, yeah, to France through Korea, and then longer delays at the airport. But I guess that's the price we're paying right now for wanting to fly.
Yeah.
And, of course, having to be vaccinated. So that's the way they got me.
Okay.
International travel, you need a vaccination. All right.
Okay, well, good talking to you again, Frenchie.
Good talking to you. You take care.
So long.
Listen to The Point anytime, anywhere on Odyssey. Odyssey is your new audio home for all the music, news, sports, and podcasts that matter to you. Find your favorite stations like The Point and discover more. Music stations, local and trusted news sources, sports talk and team coverage, plus today's biggest podcasts. Find it all on the Odyssey app. AUDACY.
Churchill Downs and the home stretch of another edition of Tall Tales. During the break here, Jose handed me a note recording what a poster named Chris Bielchino put on Facebook, and Chris identifies the author that was on the tip of my tongue, but I couldn't remember, Robin DiAngelo, who wrote a book called White Fragility. And I haven't read the book, and I don't intend to, but I have read reviews of it, critical reviews of some of the stuff that, she would gather a group of executives in a large room, stride to the front of the room and say, all right, you are the problem. And so a little earlier, I talked about people like Jeff Bezos and Henry Ford, who weren't particularly experts at any given thing, but could take different things and pull them all together in accordance with a vision that would allow them to make huge amounts of money. Henry Ford, 15 million Model Ts, et cetera. And I'm afraid that's what we're dealing with here with Robin DiAngelo and Henry Rogers, also known as Ibram X. Kendi. Kendi is theoretically a professor at Boston University. I don't know what he teaches, if he's a good teacher. I suspect not. And DiAngelo is something of a writer. I don't think either one of them has ever been recognized as having star quality in the fields that they're in. They obviously understand sociology, group psychology, etc. And they're pulling together several potentially unrelated themes and relating them. For instance, the fact that until 1865, slavery was legal in the United States. Slaves were African Americans. Slavers were white Americans, mostly, but not always. There were blacks that owned slaves. There were Indians that owned slaves, and so on. But the standard thinking is that white people own black people. And when this is explained in the right fashion, then you're supposed to say, wow, you're supposed to look at your skin and say, wow, slavery. And then you're supposed to feel guilty about what happened over 150 years ago because you're white and the slaves were black. So there's something called white guilt, where the Kendys and the D'Angelos of the world will continually remind everyone that's not an African American or whatever of the necessity for them to feel guilty about what happened. And I just can't buy that. As I've explained on the show before, on my mother's side, my great-grandma came from Denmark in 1890. He's kind of missed the slavery part. And on my father's side, Charles A. Klitzkie was a corporal in the 13th Wisconsin Volunteers Union Army Civil War. It's pretty hard to hang slavery around his neck. But this makes no difference. It is a completely racist explanation of the world where if you're white, you're supposed to feel guilty. And you're supposed to recognize that everything is governed by race and that the whites folks have set themselves up as supreme and built a system that keeps other races down. And by pulling all of these things together and being articulate, like Kennedy's very articulate, charismatic in his own way, or like D'Angelo, the same thing, by pulling all of these things together, like Henry Ford pulled all of these things together, and packaging them and then selling them, they're able to make fantastic amounts of money. D'Angelo knocks down like 25 grand for a lunch speech. Huge money. So it's unfortunate that, that the people who have this kind of skill to pull things together and to make a lot of money out of it go the direction they do. But it's the world that we live in.
So is their end game to make more money than their, quote, privileged opposite pigmented people?
Well, they're already there, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or is their end game to control the thoughts, the mind speak of people?
Well, the two things are very closely related. You're not going to get somebody to come along and pony up big money for a speaker. If for example, if I got a hold of AT&T and I said, I'd like to come in and give you a 1-hour lecture on the vicissitudes of a radio program called Tall Tales, and I'm only going to charge you 25 grand for it, I don't think I'd get very far. You have to have something, you have to have some kind of mind-bending dimension to what it is that you're going to talk about. And, when it comes to mind-bending dimensions, there's nothing like guilt. When people feel guilty, you can get them to do things that they otherwise wouldn't do. So I think the two are closely related. They keep beating the racist drum, the anti-racist drum, keep making more money, keep beating the drum, etc. So perhaps for them, the worst possible thing that could happen would be that if everything that they wanted came true, because they wouldn't have anything to sell anymore.
Well, obviously, one person, Kendi, has bucked the whole white privilege thing when it comes to income.
Certainly.
And in a sense, if you look at a lot of the media and social media, that the mind thought has already taken effect also.
Absolutely.
So
yeah.
Somehow he's been able to buck the system.
He has. He's been very successful at it. You got to give him that. And it's most unfortunate Well, I think we've kind of had enough of anti-racism for today, so I think I'll just cruise through Facebook here today until we reach the end of the show. Starting out with Jose Ted Pago Jr. Uncle Bob, you air the lunacy of skipping the assessment of ordnance and any hazardous waste on the proposed property for the newer hospital, which has been discovered. The rightful owners haven't been compensated. I'm not quite sure what he's saying there. Can you help me with that, Jose? Is he speaking
I think they're going to, yeah, a little in the beginning and maybe the whole, in the interest of her interest, some procedures might be glossed over.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's, and then we've got Rico, who is here, and Jose Ted Pago Jr., 180,000 as of 2020. Is he talking about population? I guess, huh? And then he goes on to say that may be questionable because it states, too, that the average life expectancy is 80 years old. Yeah. I guess I'm not very good at interpreting what Jose is trying to say. But Jose, you come back tomorrow and we'll work on this a little bit more, okay? So here we are at the end of another exciting episode of Tall Tales, and I'm back on island. I will be back tomorrow. I will not be late like I was yesterday. Looking forward to talking to you then.
The Point is KUSG, Hagåtña, Guam, 93.3 FM and 104.3 HD3.
Drug makers not financially liable. I'm Jack Callahan, Fox News. A judge in California says 3 counties and the city of Oakland have failed to prove that 4 drug makers helped to fuel the state's opioid crisis. And District Judge Peter Wilson in Orange County says he will rule against the county's claims for $50 billion in damages. Lawyers for the plaintiffs say they will appeal that ruling. Congressional Democrats pushing for votes this week on President Biden's spending plans, despite the continued lack of support from a key senator.
As Democrats work to shore up support on a nearly $2 trillion social spending bill, West Virginia Democrat Joe Manchin made clear he is not yet ready to give his support.
To be clear, I will not support the reconciliation legislation without knowing how the bill will impact our debt and our economy and our country.
In response, White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said the president's proposal is fiscally responsible and creates jobs, and is confident the administration will gain Manchin's support.
Fox's Jared Halpern, the Treasury Department says it plans to borrow more than $1 trillion during the fourth quarter of this year to meet government spending obligations. Kenosha, Wisconsin, a jury's been seated. Opening arguments are scheduled this morning in the trial of Kyle Rittenhouse.
The young man is accused of shooting 3 people, killing 2 during a violent night of protest in Wisconsin after the shooting of Jacob Blake by police last summer. Rittenhouse was 17 when he traveled from his home in Illinois during protests that broke out last August in Kenosha. Rittenhouse faces life in prison if he's convicted on one of the homicide counts against him.
Fox's Tom Rigotti reports the trial